Imagine for a moment that you're a wealthy supervillain, and you have a tobacco company, as well as a dearth of ethical guidelines and no moral compass at all. How would you go about marketing your product? Get as creative as you want. Hide the fact that your product is both addictive and carcinogenic. Pay doctors to tell their patients that cigarettes are good for them. Hire the inventor of advertising to associate cigarettes with the nascent second wave of feminism. Create healthy cigarette brands. Create modified strains of the tobacco plant cultivated for higher levels of the addictive stimulant it contains. Send undercover brand representatives to schools and give free cigarettes to children. Got all those weird and disturbing images in your head now? Good, because all of those things were actually done by actual tobacco companies in the last century, while the United States government and its allies were ramping up an expensive, destructive, so-called war on drugs. Or WAD? That's the acronym, and that is how we are saying it. I'm not going to be subtle about my biases here. I do want to make it clear that many cultures indigenous to North America hold tobacco as one of a few sacred herbs, and it was the commodification of that herb which led to the unconscionable disaster that is the tobacco industry. And full disclosure, I have an addictive personality and numerous drug dependencies, all of which are completely legal. Part 1. Want a Coke? That's right, we are going back to this format. Tankenstein is not here to mark the passage of chapters by interrupting, so here we go. Everybody knows that Coca-Cola got its name from the cocaine they used to add to it, right? And then, when the cocaine was banned, they switched over to caffeine, another stimulant that is roughly as addictive but less stimulating than, and without the same mind-altering properties of, cocaine. Of course, everybody knows Sigmund Floyd prescribed the cocaine to some of his patients, and famously used it himself for a while. Everybody knows it is not what killed him. And obviously, people continue using the cocaine to this day, despite the ongoing prohibition and threat of imprisonment if caught by authorities. We'll talk a bit more about that last part in a minute. Possible side effects of using the cocaine include addiction, reckless behavior, sleep deprivation, nasal ulcers, the gradual realization that that guy over there who's been staring at you for hours might be the communist cyborg who killed JFK, election to the United States Senate and/or presidency, and of course, impotence. Did I mention that tobacco is still legal? It produces an airborne toxin that causes COPD, heart disease, and cancer. Those things killed all my grandparents. Anyway, the cocaine is illegal, along with methamphetamines and opioids and all the other dangerous things we never ever see or hear about anymore because they're illegal. And we have all kinds of police to protect us now from all the dangerous drugs. Yay, what? Wow, I actually feel physically stupider after saying that. Can we just cut that part out? Yeah? Great. Part 2. Prohibition kills. I don't want to get into a bunch of long-winded stuff about this, so just to summarize, drug prohibition helps nobody except private prisons, the DEA, anyone looking to secure a monopoly through violence, politicians looking for easy points with the tough-on-crime crowd, and of course, the terrorists, who profit from the importation and sale of illicit drugs. Prohibition makes life more dangerous for people living with addictions. People die from overdoses for fear that seeking medical intervention will lead to prosecution and jail time, because, you know, it does. There are still people serving sentences for possession of marijuana in jurisdictions where it is now legal to buy and sell it. And we all know the racial disparities, how policing is focused on problem areas, and the feedback loop that creates. None of this is controversial, by the way. It is 100% facts and logic, and that's the end of it. Part 3. Portugal. You knew I was going to bring this up, right? This July marks 20 years since Portugal's decriminalization of illicit drugs went into effect. They did not make it strictly legal, and people who are caught using or in possession of illegal drugs still face penalties. The difference is that they've taken incarceration out of that equation. Panels of medical professionals and drug experts whatever that means, can impose penalties that include community service and mandatory addiction treatment programs. That comes with its own assumptions and problems. It isn't perfect, nothing is. It's a step though, and a big one. And what they've done alongside this might be even more important. Portugal has invested in harm reduction measures like safe sites and needle exchanges, as well as more treatment services for people living with addictions. Importantly, the move has reduced the legal stigma that deterred people from seeking help in the event of an emergency. Opioid overdoses, along with infection rates of diseases associated with drug use, have fallen. Compared to nations with a punitive approach to drug use and possession, this seems more pragmatic, not to say compassionate, which, it could be argued, might each be key to the other. True, experimentation with drugs initially went up. So it did with cannabis after Canada's government legalized that. The think pieces offering advice to middle-aged people trying marijuana for the first time were just wonderful and informative. But in both cases, experimentation leveled off and hasn't led to greater rates of dependency. And as a nice side bonus, it has saved billions in costs associated with the policing and incarceration of people who use drugs, just in case you're interested in something other than the steep human cost of the carceral approach. Now, it might be tempting to hold Portugal up as a blueprint for every other country. I can't speak to that. It is a whole country with a total population smaller than that of Los Angeles or New York. Even a city like Toronto has roughly half the total population of Portugal on its own. Larger populations and different cultures have their own unique challenges and will each require a specialized approach. But there's two things we can be sure of. Simply banning drugs and jailing anyone associated with them is expensive and doesn't work, and treating addiction as a medical issue instead of a purely legal one demonstrably reduces rather than exacerbates harm. Facts and logic, that's all I'm saying. True, Portugal still prosecutes drug traffickers, and I have some questions about how that impacts the benefits of decriminalizing use and possession. For instance, opioids might still get stepped on or substituted outright for much deadlier substances like fentanyl, and it leaves an intact revenue stream for the kind of unregulated distributor who is incentivized by profit to do that. Complete legalization and regulation of all drugs might reduce that. Not to mention, it might be helpful in diminishing some of the over-policing of racialized and or economically disadvantaged communities. That's really important. Just, by the way. But like I said, Portugal took a step and saw net benefits. We can all learn from that. So, are drugs bad? That's too big a question. My short answer is no. But are drugs a crime? Let's go with that. Yes and no. Legally, you're still gonna have to deal with authorities on some level, and most drugs, legal or not, can be dangerous if used irresponsibly. Otherwise, well, using drugs for any reason, whether it's medical, recreational, or to satisfy an addictive craving, doesn't have to be a legal issue. The prohibition of recreational drug use is infantilizing and dangerous, and we've seen for a century now how incarceration destroys lives and families at least as readily as addiction does. Treating drug use like a crime is short-sighted at best and deliberately harmful at worst. Now, doing all that supervillain stuff I said at the beginning, like creating long-term demand for a toxic, addictive product by giving that product to children, that should be treated like a crime. It's weird that all the real-life companies that did that are allowed to continue doing business, right? Isn't it weird that none of the people involved were subjected to anything like the actual life sentence that Alan Russell recently got for possession of 1.5 ounces of cannabis, or that the thousands of other people imprisoned for marijuana possession are still in prison, while former police officers and politicians are now legally profiting from the sale of that same weed that they jailed people for and actively resisted legalizing? I think that's weird and unfair. I think that's a crime of some description. I think those former police officers and politicians should individually face accountability and make meaningful efforts towards restitution. I think tobacco companies should be divested of all their assets to the direct benefit of victims and their families. I think anyone with a criminal record for selling or possessing marijuana should be freed, monetarily compensated, and have their records expunged.
You know what else we should do?
Yes, Tank, I know exactly what you're thinking. And no, I don't think we should kill or eat anyone involved.
You are no fun.
Well, apparently someone has to be. But what do I know? I'm just an aging masked vigilante with a YouTube channel. What do you think? Let me know with a comment below. Like and subscribe. Share it with your friends and colleagues. Or if you prefer, you can get in the comments and accuse me of all the bad faith, commie, cancel culture you want. I'll probably delete your comment if you do, but you know, go off. If you prefer to contribute to my material well-being, you can join the various humans and the one extra-dimensional interloper who give me money on Patreon. I've got a Ko-fi if that's more your speed. Links are in the description. And of course, follow me on Twitter for hot takes, Instagram for, selfies, I guess, SoundCloud for this stuff without the video, and whatever other vectors I'm using in an effort to aggregate attention. Again, links are below. Join me again next time for a light look at loitering. It's a weird crime with a deceptively interesting story, and I imagine there will be no surprises for anyone who's ever been asked to move along, please. Until then, this is the Silver Samaritan saying good luck and stay safe. Oh, and the United States government imported and sold cocaine throughout the 1980s, jailed and murdered thousands of people for distributing and or using the product they imported and sold. Everybody knows it, and not a lot of people talk about it. It's weird, right?